Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Hi, J.R. Thanks for joining me.
No, thanks for having me.
So the big news last week, Democratic Governor Tony Evers and Republican legislative leaders, they tried to negotiate a nearly $2 billion spending package. It would have pulled money from the state's $2.5 billion surplus and would have increased school funding while also providing property and income tax reductions. But it failed in the state Senate. Can you recap what happened?
So the governor reached a quote-unquote deal with Assembly Speaker Robin Vos and Senate Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu that would divvy up a piece of the state surplus and basically deliver a lot of nice things for people before all these lawmakers go face voters in November. The problem seems to be that they didn't have enough votes in the Senate Republican caucus alone to pass it. Now, depends on who you talk to. The governor's office insists they had 17 votes from a Senate, or told they had 17 GOP votes from Senate Republicans in negotiations. That's interesting because Steve Noss was a no immediately. Chris Capia from Delafield votes no a lot. So there's 2 out of 18 that you really don't count on very much. So as this thing progressed, we found out that Tom Tiffany and his staff were calling Republican lawmakers saying, we don't like this thing. Now, I talked to one lawmaker who said that the Tiffany aide that called him didn't urge him to vote against it, but made clear that Tom Tiffany was opposed to it. So the governor's office is saying that Tom Tiffany blew this up. Republicans are saying that Governor Evers couldn't deliver any Democratic votes in the Senate. The bottom line is this is kind of emblematic of how things have gone with Evers and Devin LeMahieu and their approach to leadership. So you look at Governor Evers' 7.5 years in office now, he's never really effectively engaged the legislature to bring them to his point of view. He's badgered them, used the bully pulpit, said the public's on my side. But as far as like rolling up the shirt sleeves, getting in a room and like hashing out the nitty gritty, that's not his style. And that's true as well with his Democratic colleagues in the state Senate and the Assembly. He's never really embraced them coming in and be part of negotiations. The exception has been during the budget last year because they knew they weren't going to get 17 GOP votes in that caucus. So Senate Democrats had to see the table. They got the votes needed, passed the budget. This time, he didn't engage them. Whether he thought they would come along, whether he had trusted that there'd be 17 GOP votes, he didn't bring along that caucus. And you could argue that maybe he didn't need to. They're not the majority. He should be able to trust Republicans. But that would have been probably a safe bet, people tell me, to at least get something that they want in that package before you pass it. Devin LeMahieu, meanwhile, he's got this caucus that he's not really been able to manage the entire time he's been there. They're constantly trying to get 17 votes. He constantly has members who are coming out against things that he negotiates. And rather than like trying to hammer people into place or force them in to come along, he basically put on the floor knowing he was short and played chicken with Democrats. Like, all right, guys, we're going to see if you're going to vote against the package that your governor negotiated. And lo and behold, they did. So in some ways, the only person who comes out clean in this is Robin Vos, the Assembly Speaker. He delivered like he pretty much always does, people point out to me. They got it through that, a bipartisan vote in the Assembly, falls apart in the Senate, and everybody's pointing a finger at each other saying, well, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. No, it's your fault that your people are getting this relief ahead of November.
So we've got this backstory of very slim margins in the state Senate. It's 18 Republicans and 15 Democrats. And in order for a majority, as you're saying, they would need to have 17 votes, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it was fascinating. They tried to get to 17 to shore up support with adding an amendment to the bill. So the big outlines were money for special education, money to schools to drive down property taxes, money for a rebate, no tax on overtime, no tax on tips. Those are the big kind of highlight pieces of this package. On Wednesday, they added an amendment with 2 small pieces. One was a property tax break, expanding it for disabled veterans. The second piece was adding $20 million for disaster grants. Now, Andre Jacques, a Republican from northeastern Wisconsin, He has repeatedly tried to expand that property tax break for veterans. So when he got that provision in the bill, he voted for it. Rob Hutton of Brookfield was seen as being kind of on the fence or maybe a no on this thing. He authored a bill this session to provide $20 million in disaster grants. The amendment mirrored the bill that he wrote. He still voted no. I caught him after the vote. He said he never asked that provision to be in there and had concerns about the package from the start because, in his words, it was not fiscally responsible. State spending is already too high, and more of the surplus should have gone back to taxpayers and rebates. So if your whole plan is to kind of like pull people in by giving them like goodies that they wanted, don't you think you would have approached Rob Hutton first and said, hey, would this get you on board? Can we get you here if we give you this provision? And they barely didn't communicate it to him, and he still voted no.
Okay, so I really want to break down the details of this deal. Before we get to how it would have affected schools, I would like to know how it specifically would have affected taxpayers.
So one big piece is this rebate. So of the $1.8 billion, it included like $900 million-ish for these rebates. Those rebates were $600 for married joint filers and $300 for individuals, but there are a couple of like little detail questions. So it's like if you had a net tax liability of less than $600, you didn't get a full $600, right? Because you didn't pay that much in taxes. So for some folks, they would have gotten less than $600. Same with the individuals. So, and there were people, Democrats, who said, hey, this means that people on Social Security, for example, wouldn't see the full $300 or $600 because they didn't pay that much in taxes. So they had a problem with that. So that was a big piece for the rebate. The school money, so remember there's a cap on what districts can spend per student between state aid and property taxes. The more state aid in that formula, the less they collect in property taxes. This package included more than $300 million for the 26-27 school year to schools. It just would have driven down property tax. It would have been new spendable money, okay? According to the Fiscal Bureau, which is the nonpartisan budget arm of the legislature, that had been about $387 per student in each district to drive down property taxes. Milwaukee would have been the biggest beneficiary, the biggest district of the state, about $25 million less in property taxes next year if this become law. And then the other two big provisions really for taxpayers where there's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. That had been about $100 million-ish the first full year it was in effect. Oh, sorry, a lot more than that. $180 million the first year for the overtime deduction, $53 million for the tips deduction in 26-27.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross of WizPolitics.com. So schools were, actually right now they're in the process of putting their budgets together for next year. And the trend with schools is that there's like fewer and fewer students enrolling in public schools. Everything's getting more expensive, and state funding has historically not been keeping pace. But about this deal, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards said in a statement, they said, quote, "The state has shifted away from providing inflationary increases in spendable resources for schools for 17 years. One state surplus deal can't reverse that trend by itself." What kind of, like you touched upon it a little bit, what were critics, like both the Democratic critics, the Republican critics, people from schools, what were they saying were the big flaws in this deal?
The Republican critics, it was simple. We spend too much as it is. This would spend more because you'd build into future spending this additional $300 million. So when you go to the budget next year, you'd have this as a higher starting point, and that was a problem for them. For Democrats, it was that we've got several issues. One, they're talking about a quote-unquote Trump recession, that they're worried about the economy, and if things go south, that will mean that we won't have $2.5 billion. Remember, that surplus is a projection. The end of the biennium is still 13 months away. Things can change. They're worried that things are going to go south and we won't have that much money. Number two, there's a subtext to all this that Democrats feel pretty good about their prospects this fall. They think they can be in a trifecta where they have the governor's office, the assembly, and the Senate. They want to keep this money around to do what they want with it, right? Governor Evers is retiring. Robin Vos and Devin Lemmy are retiring. They're not going to be around next year. Democrats are saying, why should we allow three people who are lame ducks to dictate this deal to us without getting our priorities. And for some of them, the kind of unspoken thing is, hey, we could use that money next year building our budget and do a lot of good things with it for our priorities. Why would we spend it now to help those guys on the way out the door?
Yeah, some people were calling it like a backroom deal. Some people were calling it an election year bribe. One legislator even called it a turducken because they called it a turkey bill done by some lame ducks.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Always creative with the quotes they are. So
Right. So the deal happened after, it was months of negotiations between Evers and these Republican legislative leaders. Why were they pushing it through so urgently at that point?
Because this money's been sitting there and there's pressure to do something with it. For Republicans, some of them, they want to get it out the door because they're looking at the fall election going, hey, if Democrats control everything, we might have no say in how this is spent. Why shouldn't we try to get something we want? Plus, two, if you're a Republican on the ballot this fall, you might want to be able to say, hey, I delivered X, Y, and Z for you guys. Keep that in mind come November. For Governor Evers, this is kind of like a legacy thing, right? Part of his resume. He could say, hey, my last big thing, we had these surpluses when I was in office. We found a way to help taxpayers in schools on my way out the door. Been a nice little way to tie up his time in office. But now it's not going to happen, barring, miracles do happen in the Capitol. You can see a situation where the pressure gets too great on these guys. They take a run at it. But what would be different? How would they get back some of these guys in the Capitol? There are a couple of retiring members who I heard Wednesday saying, this is my last time here. I'm not coming back. We took this shot, and that's it. But pressure always has an interesting way of getting politicians to act. So we'll see if there's a follow-up. Right now, this is the kind of last hurrah of the 25-26 legislative session.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is there a chance for another deal? And if so, when do you think it would be most likely? You were just kind of touching upon it, but what exactly would they need to get this off the ground?
Pressure.
Again?
Pressure. If there's pressure to do something, if they feel pressure, then that would be it. But without that pressure, what is it? What really moves these guys? They took a shot and fell 3 votes short. So do Democrats have a change of heart? Maybe. Your Republicans, the 3 no votes in the Senate, they seem pretty locked in. So I don't know you're going to get those guys to change. So, what is that pressure point that would change the minds of the guys who voted no?
And one of the things is that affordability is on everybody's minds. As you've mentioned, it's a midterm election year. That was the big issue that people ran on in 2024. And, there's a lot of factors going into the affordability crisis right now. But would $300 matter that much to people? I mean, in terms of the overall financial picture?
Good question. The rebate, $600 for married couples. The property tax break on the median valued home would be about $107 million. If you're making tips, if you're making overtime, probably makes a difference. But how much difference it makes when you're paying how much more for gas every week, right? It could eat a lot of those savings. But, people are definitely struggling and they're looking for help. And this is an opportunity to provide at least some help. The question is, what do you do with it next year that provides more help? Or does it get put toward, more programs? What would, how would you use it? Lots of unknowns where this was an opportunity to do something that was real and immediate for voters who are saying, hey, I'm going to help you out. Just wait till January, though.
And can you explain the component of the failed deal that would have eliminated taxes on overtime and cash tips? Like, what's happening on that front right now?
So we have federal tax breaks that are similar. Now, those tax breaks will go away. They are basically timed to last for the term of President Trump. These proposals at the state level mirror the federal break, but for the state income tax, they would be permanent. They would not go away under the proposal that has gone away. Interesting to note that Governor Evers, I think, in his budget had a provision to exempt from state income taxes the tips. Republicans pulled that out of the budget. They then passed a bill that was almost identical to the governor's call, as well as one on overtime. Evers vetoed both of those, saying they should be part of a bigger discussion. Then they came back. Those are politically popular. Let's be honest. People like those tax breaks. They're a selling point for Republicans nationally this fall, but it just fell apart as part of the deal, and they just couldn't get it done.
All right, as always, thanks for the insights, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capital Notes.
Anytime.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on Lake Effect, and check out the Capital Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
You know, every day on Up First, NPR's Golden Globe-nominated morning news podcast, we bring you 3 essential stories. At the heart of each story are questions. What really happened? What really mattered? What happens next? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious and to follow the facts. Follow Up First wherever you get your podcasts and start your day knowing what matters and why.